Well, as if the pandemic didn't give us enough insomnia, other worries are robbing Canadian exporters of sleep these days. In Export Development Canada's Fall Executive Roundtable series, we asked our key customers to share their concerns, and they weren't shy. Here's a list of the key issues they and many others are facing, together with observations on those issues and also possible remedies. Issue number one, well, bar none, it's supply chain constraints. Of all the issues raised, this one dominated, gobbling up 35% of the discussion space. And no wonder. It's been more than a decade since we've seen log jams at ports and shortages of ships and containers, and these seem as rare as gold these days. Not to mention the difficulty sourcing specific raw commodities and intermediate goods, notably semiconductors. Attendees were very candid in their assessment of the state of global supply chains, with some referring to them as entirely messed up. How did things unwind so badly? Well, remember, global supply chains have been refined over decades to be a finely tuned, complex machine spanning the far reaches of the planet. The pandemic's imprecise pounce on one market after another in no expected order or sequence threw that system into chaos, and the restart was arguably more disorderly. Add further waves of unsynchronized pandemic come lockdowns, and the mayhem is magnified multifold. It's such a muddle that many can't see a point of resolution until possibly mid-2022. Now, initially, there was enough capacity to manage things, but with growth continuing to barrel on and fundamentals suggesting hot demand can continue for some time, well, demand may well outpace our ability to satisfy it. What's issue number two? Labor constraints. Fully 20% of the responses from our audiences cited tight access to labor as a key problem, and there was a lot of discussion about remedies. This is nothing new. It was a prime issue when the Advisory Council on Economic Growth reported on it in 2017. If anything, COVID-19 gave some needed respite on this front, and we're now back to addressing a more structural fault in the economy. Possible remedies were discussed in detail in my October 21st commentary, so I refer you to that one. That's the October 21st commentary. It gives a lot of detail on the possible remedies. Now, issue number three, inflation at 18% of issues raised. So it was just a hair below the labor concerns. Well, that's another big worry keeping exporters up at night. Attendees were perplexed that shortages were leading to price hikes well beyond acceptable limits, and were agonizing over how to pass these costs on. Others shared that the mindset had shifted so quickly that passing on large increases was a snap. Well, it became clear that businesses haven't really had to think about inflation for about 3 decades, but that price expectations were now changing rapidly. Rolling up the results of an informal poll taken at each of our 14 events, attendees expect next year's consumer price inflation to average somewhere around 3.7%, which is well above target levels, and it's also in excess of the 3.4% estimate in the Bank of Canada's latest monetary policy report. Now, most did expect things to settle down as shortages are resolved, but they're also aware that price changes, together with labor shortages, were starting to push wage demands up. Now, that's something that may actually persist longer. It's harder to actually get rid of or let it wash through the system. Issue number four, specific country issues. They always crop up in our discussions, with the bulk focusing on the U.S. economy, but also on a range of other concerns and other countries, depending on where exporters are doing business and encountering challenges. Issue number five, well, here's the story. Volatile commodity prices, uncertainty about monetary policy, and recent currency movements made foreign exchange predictions the next item on the concern list. Fears of a commodity supercycle are spilling over into near-future currency worries, and inflation is feeding concern that faster rate hikes north of the border will only push the loonie higher. Temporary supply issues are indeed having that effect. When we get beyond that, the currency should calm down. Now, delegates hoped we were right, but they weren't maybe as convinced yet by the reasoning. While other issues lower on the list include pandemic-specific effects, travel restrictions, access to capital, and concerns about the future of the energy sector and how policy in that sector will affect the balance of investment plans there. The bottom line? Well, one issue that clearly wasn't worrisome was growth. Nobody at our events expressed concern that growth was too low or was about to ebb. Now that's great news. All of the issues really seem to center around managing the explosive growth we're currently seeing. Well, it's a nice problem to have, but it is still a problem and one that needs a lot of creativity to resolve. So let's get to it. Until next week, I'm Peter Hall.